Alright, so now we're going to turn the grids on. Right now I have the root phi MAD on there. That's the major area divisions, which is basically just the root phi on the theme of 2, which means there's 4 little root phis inside the mother root phi. But right now we're looking at the grid and how elements lock in and parallel with the grid. And eyes can be created from any intersection point, and this includes the edges as well. You can see how things are locking in. The diagonals of the body are locking into that woman. Even the diagonal of that horse is paralleling the reciprocal diagonal, which I don't think I marked that, but some of this stuff is so hidden it's hard to see when you're analyzing, but it's once you look at it again you can start to see even more that's hidden from you. So that one was created with an eye, and you can see how her dress is locked into the vertical line that's created from that eye. Same with this guy. His shoulders are locked in. This lady is paralleling and locking into the diagonal. This guy's locked in. See how all these guys are locked in? The one thing about these grids is it helps you create unity, movement, and rhythm. You saw how we created rhythm with the gamut, and the gamut came straight from the grid. You can see how we're creating unity and movement from the coincidences. So once these things are locked in, you're automatically creating a coincidence because it's an edge-to-edge relationship. So we've got movements going up the grid, across the grid, diagonally from the grid. All these things are creating unity and movement, which is hidden in the master painting, but it's a real treat to the viewer. So we can see this eye up here, the man standing in the waters, locked right into that eye. Drop the line down, you can see the woman. And I think we already covered that in the coincidence area, how they're united on the same linear path. And it keeps going and going. So those are all the areas that are locked into the root phi armature. And if you've seen the previous videos, you know how to build the armature of any root rectangle. And I'm going to link that above. So now we're going to go on to the figure-ground relationship of the painting. So figure-ground relationship is just the way the subject interacts with the background. Can we draw a clear imaginary line around the subject without losing contrast, without obscuring our visual perception of them? Can we tell right away what it is, or do we have to look closer and find out what's going on? So a lot of these characters have an aspect of view, which we'll cover later, but also the figure-ground relationship is good. This lady standing there, her head loses contrast with the background elements, so that obscures our vision and kind of makes us think a little bit more like what's going on. Even the distant characters have good figure-ground relationship, and he uses an aspect of view to define what those dark silhouettes are. So aspect of view is basically figure-ground relationship, but it's a side profile of the subject or with their limbs spread so we can easily identify their shape, especially in silhouette situations like this. If we were in the fields taking a photo of this scene right now, all those characters would be silhouetted by the sun. So it's good to have these separated limbs like Van Gogh has, which helps us identify what's going on in the scene and what the subject is doing. We can clearly see what their arms are doing, if it's a woman, if it's a man. Some of them are better than others, but for the most part, he's created a lot of his characters with good figure-ground relationship and an aspect of view. So aspect of view, a good way to think of that is to look at Egyptian art and how they captured the side profile of the face and limbs that are spread. A lot of street photographers use this technique. They capture a guy walking with his legs spread or anything like that. Another technique I like to use for analyzing master paintings is called separating shapes. And that's where we've got good figure-ground relationship. The subjects are clearly separated, or they've got good overlap, overlapping by half, a third, or phi. And when they're overlapped clearly, there's no confusion of what's going on with the subjects. The mind doesn't have to work harder to figure out what's going on, and that makes for a more pleasing composition. So right now, I'm noticing these overlaps, the way he overlapped the shapes with the background, and I'm seeing some errors with his overlapping. This one is good, the lady on the left. Those two characters are overlapped perfectly. Those characters are overlapped pretty good. Her head is overlapped poorly with the background element. These two characters are overlapped really poorly. The head is overlapped with the edge of the dress, and it's creating some visual confusion right there. So this lady's head is overlapped poorly with the background element. So I'm going to turn all these poorly overlapped areas to a red so you can see that better. You always want to avoid kissing, which is where two edges meet each other and you can't determine what object is in front of the other. And some artists like Giorgio Morandi make it their purpose to intentionally coincide and kiss elements. And I'll show you a picture of his art real quick so you can see how each element is kissing and coinciding with each other, but that's part of his artistic style. So there's the areas that are in red, and those are the bad overlapping areas. It's a common mistake, but it's a mistake that no master painter should make, I don't think, but things happen. All right, so now we're moving on to aerial perspective. And this is a natural occurrence in nature. So as the distance increases, usually there's particles in the air, dust or moisture. Any small particles can create this depth, but Van Gogh's painting doesn't have this illusion of depth. It doesn't lose contrast as it gains distance, but he does have a low contrast area in the foreground, and we can create the illusion of depth by using aerial perspective in drawings and things like that, and rendering light in a way that it loses contrast as it goes forward or backward. So we've got low contrast in the front, but he's also got this area that has high contrast, and it's got an abstract shape, kind of draws attention to that lady on the lower left. And if you squint and blur your eyes, you'll be able to see these different values in the contrast. All right, so now we're going to go to the gazing direction, and the gazing direction has to do with the balance of the image. So if we take the bulk of the image, which is the group of people as well as the lady on the right, if we take that as our bulk and we line up some lines, we'll see how close we are to the edge. And this helps us measure unwanted negative space and a balance within the composition. So right now we can see there's more room on the left than there is the right. Typically, if there's more room on the left, that means the gazing direction is going from right to left. But the design elements in this composition are stronger, like that major diagonal, the major Baroque diagonal, going from the lower left to the upper right, and the pointing devices, meaning their arms and the carriage in the distance, the lines. All this leads us to believe that the painting, the direction of the painting, is going from left to right. We could even snip off a little bit on the left and see how it affects the overall composition, but I believe we can snip off probably ½ an inch if we wanted to, and nothing will be missed. But since the left and right is not so far off, it doesn't make that much of a difference. Once we snip it, there's a high contrast on the left side, so that would have to be adjusted. But you can see the difference that it creates. It's not much, but it's a little bit. Kind of just tightens things up a little bit. So now we're looking at the breathing room, and the breathing room can be considered as actual breathing room, the negative space around the subject's mouth, but it can also be the breathing room of the whole composition, and it's the top to bottom balance. So again, we take the bulk of the composition, which is the horizon line at the top, and the area at the bottom where there's more contrast, and we can see the composition has more negative space and low contrast near the bottom of the composition, and we can see how it's going from top to bottom in this composition. So the breathing room and gazing direction are both part of the law of symmetry, which is also a Gestalt psychology principle. So it's really important for you to understand these Gestalt psychology principles if you want to be in full control of visual perception. So right now we're looking at radiating lines, and these are also considered coincidences, but they're radiating from a common point, which is the sun, and they're edge-to-edge relationships on a line of continuity. And it's interesting that Van Gogh creates radiating lines from the sun, and maybe he's trying to suggest that everything in this painting is created by the sun. So with these techniques you can create illusions, you can create rhythm, movement, unity, and you can also create subliminal messages if you want. Things that suggest stories to people with a higher sensitivity for these symbols and these design techniques. So I just drag it out and move it around and see if I can line up multiple elements on the same linear path. Another technique that I do when I'm analyzing paintings is I turn it to black and white and I blur it a little bit. And this is similar to squinting. It helps you see the value changes and the areas that pop out, like the greatest area of contrast. So while it's got the black and white and blur, I'll go around and check the edges, see if there's any areas of high contrast around the edge that grab our attention, that distract from the main subject. And some of these areas on the edge are actually near our main subjects, so they don't distract us as much. They actually help guide the eye to them. Next, I identify the greatest area of contrast. So I'll use threshold to find the lightest light and the darkest dark and see where they meet up and see how close they are to each other. Typically you want the lightest light up against the darkest dark, and that'll be the greatest area of contrast. So as I analyze this, obviously the sun's going to be the brightest, but with the greatest area of contrast, it's not always the brightest part, because the sun and things like lamps or reflections, those things are always going to be bright. But since we're so used to seeing these type of things, we instantly dismiss it and go to the next area of high contrast. So in this case, it's not the sun. I believe it's the woman standing in the lower right near the water. So you got the bright reflecting sun around her on the water, but her silhouette holds more contrast than any other figure. So now we're going to take a look at the color theory. And Van Gogh is great at his colors, and I've done an article on this about Van Gogh's color theory, but basically he incorporates red, blue, green, and yellow within his compositions, and each of those colors have a hierarchy, and that's what these little swatches are doing. It's recognizing that red is the major color found within this composition, and the painting's called Red Vineyard, so that's appropriate to make the red more prominent than any other color. And then the yellow is the second tier of colors, and then he's got blue, and then he incorporates the green. So variations of these colors, but he's created a hierarchy amongst them, which makes for great color harmony. Alright everyone, that's it for Van Gogh's analyzed painting. So thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate all the comments and views and likes and people visiting my site and checking out the things that I make for mastering composition. Stay tuned. I'm going to try and do one video per week, and all of it's relating to composition and design. So thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.